Hello, everybody, and welcome to this week's PESA Presents, a special request on our friends, weathering and erosion. So let's begin. Now, first of all, weathering is or are the processes by which rock is broken down, and erosion is how those little bits and pieces are actually moved away from their source. So that, in summation, is the difference between the two. If it did help, we have this right here. So weathering, your rocks are breaking down. Erosion and transport are those little bits and pieces of rock moving away. Now, kinds of weathering. So first of all, we have chemical weathering, which is the decomposition is the word. Now, we don't mean by this decomposition as say like you leave an apple outside too long and it rots. No. What you mean by that is literally just what it says right there. The atoms in a mineral, in this case, say pyrite, interacts with chemicals in the environment and it causes it to basically unbond the mineral at a molecular level and it sort of falls apart. Now, that is one of the methods. Oxidation is that example. You can also have chemical weathering through the action of acids. And overall, the most main agent is water. Now, physical weathering is also called mechanical weathering. It's the actual breakup of rock into smaller bits. You physically break the stuff up while you're there. Now, the agent can be biological, in other words, say plants or animals, like right here, although this is actually from a movie set, chemical or physical. Now, some examples of this are exfoliation, freeze thaw, and a lot of different other things. So, kinds of erosion. That obviously right there is the Grand Canyon, which is a very, very big example of just what erosion can really do to a rock. Now, gravity. So, how does gravity erode things? Well, gravity can do it in a lot of different ways, actually. Mass wasting or mass movement, or the family of movements caused by gravity. It's just two terms that are sort of used interchangeably for the effects of a couple of different things: avalanches, landslide. Now, landslide, if you look into landslide, you'll see a lot of terms, and even too sometimes in old maps, they'll note this something called a talus. That is either the rocks themselves or the shape of the slope. But basically, so you have a landslide and there's a slope right there, and these rocks have formed this slope and then they're at the base. So talus is either said rocks or the slope itself. Now you have mud flows, or also conversely, lahars, or ones that are basically volcanic mud flows, sort of. Now, two other terms which you'll see a lot in this are slump, which are the massive rocks that are moving down a slope, and compare that to creep, which is the gradual movement down a slope. So slump is basically like, say you have a sinkhole, and then a sinkhole opens up underneath something, and it just doesn't, like you put a cookie cutter in the ground, it's not just an even thing top to bottom. No, there's a little bit tapering out over the edge. So slump is when that little bit tapering over the edge just goes boom right down in the hole, and creep is when it just gradually goes down the side. Now, ice erosion is best known when applied to glaciers. We had a separate video on glaciers earlier this year that goes into that a lot. Now, as an example right here, this is granite with an erosion channel etched by the effect of glacial meltwater. Glaciers did a massive, massive reworking of every continent they were on, and not that many people really realize that. It's something very insanely vast, really, to think of just the effect of glaciers on the superficial geology, even say the pass of water, groundwater. They've altered a lot in not only American topography, but other nations around the world. Now, water. Now, water erosion can be influenced by slope, soil type, vegetative cover, or a lot of other factors. Now, there are different forms of that. Gully is when you have large amounts of water moving. Real erosion is when you do small channels. Sheets are when thin layers of sediment move. And then you have splash erosion, where you just like plop some water on there and then ping, and they just plop off. And literally, it's just what it says. It's erosion through splashing. Now, there are specific terms and landforms for the effect of water erosion on the coast, inland rivers, various other bodies of land and where they're located, and so each and every one of them relates to it in turn. Now, the Sphinx, a case study in how not to or how to interpret water erosion. And also a fellow that looks very, very oddly like my Uncle Kevin, which I thought that very strongly when I saw it about 20 years ago. Now, you may or may not see in some circles that people will say the Sphinx and this area right around it is called the Giza Plateau, that was once underwater. And because of that, that is why you kind of see these, people call them channels sometimes. You kind of see those ridges in the rock right there. People see that's why. Because if you think about it, well, if you can kind of remember, if you ever seen a spot where there's a lot of water erosion and then the water's going down and down and down and how it affects different areas, that is what people say this looks like. But no, that's not true. Now, one of the things about geology is that you can look at the materials and they can tell you a lot without even saying a word. Now, you go up to the Sphinx, or even if you look up pictures of it real close, you don't need to be right next to the thing like I was. You can tell that a lot of these, well, they are, these layers of rock, a lot of them are actually different kinds of rock. There's what's called the Nubian sandstone and various other layers interspersed back and forth going on together. And because certain layers of rock are more subject to erosion than others are, they're more what's called friable. They're easier to pull apart. So that is why you have this effect on the Sphinx, which is right there. These various layers of rock being affected by actually wind erosion very differently, not water. Now, speaking of wind, that's also called aeolian erosion. That can happen through a couple of different things. Saltation is when wind hops large sand-sized particles close to the ground. Suspension is where very tiny particles stay in the wind. Traction, or it's also called surface creep, which I don't know what I think of that term. It's kind of one of those words that I like but I don't like, sort of like moist. I don't know, but it's a odd phrase. So very large particles roll on the ground. They stay on the ground, not like saltation where they kind of jump up and down a little bit. Now, wind can, the word is abrade rocks into distinct shapes. And then deflation is the process where, in wind erosion, the rock particles move then in the wind. So there are lots of different landforms caused by aeolian erosion. There's deflation or blowout, desert pavement, loess deposits, sand dunes, ventifacts. There are things called yardings, which the Sphinx in Egypt is actually yarding. So I hope that was a nice little background into the wide, wonderful world of weathering and erosion. Thank you very much, and happy holidays to everybody. Bye now.